when the waters subside, it leaves a lot of leaders who were doing a great job 10 years ago in an environment that they don't necessarily recognize, right? They're not familiar enough with it. We've also got, I also think that when I was in my 20s, I had a lot more in common philosophically, in terms of values, even perhaps, with people 20 years my senior in those leadership positions than I do now with people 20 years my junior. Everybody beats up on millennials and so on. I don't buy into any of that, but it's true that the generations that I see, and I'm looking at two teenage girls coming through school and university as well, they define work differently.
Hello, Julian, and welcome to the Smithfield podcast. Smithfield Smackdown is a podcast that explores the real challenges and opportunities that are facing leaders in tech, and that's in creative tech and investor-backed businesses. We're going to focus on understanding the issues that surround leadership, culture, hiring, innovation, but always a focus on understanding and finding practical solutions. This is a space for some honest conversation, and we can navigate the complexities of leadership today and offer our community some perspectives that hopefully inspire change and smarter leadership decisions. I've really enjoyed working with you over the years and getting to know you, and we've worked together as you've led real change and had some fun times along the way. Your story and experience has inspired me, so I hope that you have a fun time with me on the podcast. Please will you start with introducing yourself and telling us a bit more about your first real challenge in leadership?
Yeah, hi B. It's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk. A little bit about me. I'm 52, which means that I started my career in the mid 90s, and I didn't have a plan, and I definitely didn't set out to be in leadership, certainly not at that point. But I guess I spent the first sort of 5, 10 years trying everything. Digital was taking off. It was very exciting. We had email, we had the internet. It was the early days. It seems impossible now, but it was the early days of all of that. And I was lucky. I wasn't afraid to take risks. I jumped on things, even if I didn't know how to do them, learned on the job. I moved around a lot. I didn't stay in the UK. I moved around a lot through Europe and also the US. Markets everywhere were fizzy, businesses were expanding, and there was a lot of opportunity for people who had smarts and ideas and energy, a lot of space to move. And so I ended up moving quite quickly up
What was your
into
first
management
job, Julian?
positions. Sorry?
What was your first job?
My first job was a part-time job writing bylines for the Financial Times Exporter,
Right.
um, whilst I was a musician alongside. So my real job was being a musician. But yeah, I was a writer. Then I worked in television for a short while, always in creative industry, and again, sort of creative borderline digital,
Yeah.
and moved up from there. Um, in terms of first leadership challenge. I moved back from the US early 2000s as a managing director, and then shortly after that, it's just around about when I met you, actually, when we met for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
I made the transition from MD to CEO, thinking that that would be a short hop, and it wasn't. I had to start leading a team, people, a human organism, through something that wasn't just hitting targets. There was a lot of uncertainty. It was all about the people. And that was my wake up, that leadership isn't the same as management. Managing is about the plan, the spreadsheet, the delivery, the targets, the KPIs, the system. It's tangible. Leadership is much less tangible. Judgment, timing, learning how to get people to follow you, even when you don't know where you're going. They don't know where they're going. The way forward isn't maybe clear at all. So two very different jobs, and I think that was my first. That was my introduction to the challenge of leadership versus management.
What had you experienced in leadership yourself? What were the leaders that you were kind of following looking like? Can you share some thing about that?
It's a really good question. So I've always enjoyed highly emotionally intelligent people. So there's a hybrid intelligence I think that good leaders have, and I'm not sure I could have told you this when I was 26, but I can now, which is a mix of emotional intelligence and professional intelligence. Professional intelligence is a mix of experience and skills and so on, but the emotional intelligence piece, I think many great leaders have high levels of emotional intelligence. I think many great leaders use it for good and also for evil, but an understanding of how people work and how people are motivated and motivate themselves and so on. I think yeah, I think that would be the leaders that I have followed and enjoyed learning from the most have been those that have that hybrid intelligence.
Okay. And how's your summer been?
My summer's been great, thank you very much. So far, it's not over yet. It's not over yet. Still several weeks to go.
Good. What you been doing?
We have been down to Cornwall for 2 weeks,
Yeah.
in the middle of which we got married
Yay!
in a bar on the beach, which was amazing.
Awesome.
And so, yeah, so I've returned back home and back to work,
Yeah.
a married man.
Fantastic. Congratulations from me and
Thank you.
everybody at Smithfield.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about what you're doing at work, because that's also quite a new venture.
Yes. Having led a business for 6 years, 7 years, out of Africa, but in emerging markets globally, I then switched to another more or less full-time position with another large global business. And at that point, not deliberately at all, I started getting calls from people, companies looking to fine-tune leadership, to strengthen leadership, to bring on some firepower, I guess, at leadership level. Not necessarily in a full-time role, to help the business to grow, to scale, to operate more efficiently, um, and and that was an introduction for me into something that I hadn't really been paying attention to because I'd had my head down in the handlebars, leading this one business for such a long time, which is that actually I'm seeing a lot of broken leadership at my sort of level. Um, Not because there's something wrong with anyone or with leadership itself, but I think the world moved such a long way so quickly in the last 10 years, um, and not just COVID, although also COVID,
Yeah.
that I actually think the context for leadership has changed so dramatically and so rapidly. Uh, and our ability as leaders, or the ability of many people as leaders to change with it, they haven't managed to adapt, they haven't managed to keep up. And so I started getting these calls and eventually quit the full time job and switched to running my own business. Which is called Unjammed. And we are working with largely with leadership teams, companies of all different sizes, um, helping them sharpen that leadership function, lead better, so that they can grow their businesses. So that's what I'm doing now full time,
So you're
just
working
since
with
the
a
last couple
portfolio
of
of
months.
clients.
Yeah, we are. So it's my wife and I doing it together. We have half a dozen clients at any one time. Most not actually in the UK. So we have clients in the US, in North America, in Europe, in South Africa, and yeah, it's a small portfolio business. Yes,
Brilliant. Well, congratulations.
thank you.
This leads quite nicely actually into your Smackdown. So tell
Yes.
me more about that. Tell me what your Smackdown is and why.
Yeah. So my SmackDown is that I think leadership in 2025 is broken. Not everywhere, but in more places than I was expecting. And I think it's because, as I said, the context for leadership has changed. And many of the leaders in my sort of generation, so the 50 something leaders, um, we are, I think, probably facing our first prolonged crisis as professionals in leadership positions. So many of us, like me, we came up in the boom years. Again, the advent of digital, everything was moving very, very quickly. And even 2008, it took the wind out of everybody's sails, but it didn't really slow us down. The iPhone had just shown up.
Yeah.
We had momentum that carried us through. And I think a lot of people, I'm seeing a lot of folks in leadership positions today who are there because they rode that wave, without ever really being truly stress tested.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's catching up with a lot of leaders now. So I think that's the first thing that I'm seeing, and my smackdown is I think related to that. Is that
Yeah.
we need to adjust, we need to reconfigure
Mm.
leadership
Yeah.
for it to work now.
Great. And before we go into that, can you just give me, we're talking about context, and I know that we are very familiar with what's going on out there, but I think for our community, it might be really useful to just kind of talk a little bit about context and what we're talking about. Why is this time really important in leadership?
Um, I think so. COVID was a big reset. Pretty much overnight, the way we lead and manage teams changed. Everybody was remote suddenly. Lots of
Mm.
people were remote at home, confined, dealing with isolation. Everything was uncertain. So, whilst leadership on any given day is about making decisions in uncertainty, suddenly everything was uncertain. Venture-backed businesses didn't know whether they would be able to spend the money that they had, raise money to survive beyond those 2 awful years. And many of the leaders in positions of leadership at that point just didn't have the skills for that. They weren't prepared for that. And I think the impact of that is still being felt. So that's one big piece of context, I think, is that the world has just reconfigured itself. The the future of digital, which is now the present of digital,
Yeah.
is AI. That happened fast. It's expanding extremely quickly, and I think that is also changing the nature of leadership. It's also changing the nature of companies, human organisms that get together to complete tasks. And so I think that's another huge piece of context. Um, and I think that that's also flipped the kind of generational equation. Um, 20 years ago, at my age, I would have been scared. Younger colleagues would have had the cutting edge skills. They would have known more than I do about the new tools, the new technologies. They would have had more energy. They would have had sharper brains. And so the 50 somethings at that point were probably looking at less work, less opportunity.
Mm.
I think AI has flipped that actually. I think AI now lets me do much of that work that I wouldn't have been doing 20 years ago better, faster,
Yeah.
and it puts more value on experience and judgment, which at my age I have more of than somebody who's in their 20s. And so I think we got a shot in the arm. We by which I mean the people my age in my sort of position.
Mm.
Um, so I think that's also an important part of the context.
Yeah, and leadership is a harder role now. I think it's harder to train people remotely, it's harder to get those
Yes,
relationships. And
yes,
certainly from the flip side, I talk to lots of people who say, well, my leadership team are flip-flopping, they're zigzagging, they're
yeah,
moving all over the
yeah,
place.
yeah,
And I know from being in a leadership role myself that that's partly because the levers that we used to pull aren't working anymore. So we have to adapt and we have to change. And as the world changes around us and as AI is moving on so quickly, that must feel quite unsettling for people around us. And I think that I definitely agree with you that leadership needs to step up and understand that we are going to be dealing with some change along the way. And the important part of that is communicating with our staff, our teams, so that we're taking them on that journey with us. I don't know if I agree with you that leadership is broken. So I want to talk about that a little bit more and also help our audience to understand how we can start to resolve that, what solutions we can offer to leadership teams, whether that be in boardrooms or people that are leading teams, kind of on the floor.
yeah.
We help them understand what we're talking about and help them resolve that.
Yeah, leadership is broken is a soundbite, but
I love
yes,
it.
I do. I think there's a lot going on. So we've talked a little bit
Yeah.
about the context which has changed. And again, when the waters subside, it leaves a lot of leaders who were doing a great job 10 years ago in an environment that they don't necessarily recognize, right? They're not familiar enough with it. We've
Mm.
also got, I also think that when I was in my 20s, I had a lot more in common philosophically, in terms of values, even perhaps, with people 20 years my senior in those leadership positions than I do now with people
Yeah.
20 years my junior.
Mm.
Everybody beats up on millennials and so on. I don't buy into any of that, but it's true that the generations that I see, and I'm looking at two teenage girls coming through school and university as well, they define work differently than I did when I was their age. I defined work very, very much in the light of what my parents' generation considered hard work and what my grandparents considered hard work. Um, these days, it's not the same. The definition is different, and it's not about being lazy or anything. It's just a different playbook.
Yeah.
It's a different set of rules. Um,
Can I ask you a
I think
question?
that's yeah.
What key trends are we seeing in leadership where they need to step up? What do they need to improve on, or where do they need to have a lens?
I think transparency is a big one. I see a lot of leaders who are not transparent enough with the organization, with their teams. I'm speaking from a reasonably small sample size, but it's geographically quite broad. So I'm looking at different sizes of companies in different sectors in different countries. Um, Transparency is a big one. This idea that that leadership is a sort of a shadowy cabal. Decisions are made in back rooms, by people with powerful job titles and big salaries. And actually, the idea of being transparent with the organization, treating the organization and the team with a little more maturity, I don't see enough of that. I think also creating space for younger people to lead, not just manage. I don't see enough of that in the places where I work. Planning that succession properly as well. There does seem to be this sort of above the line group of people who have no succession plan at all for how the business will run without them.
Why do you think that is?
Um, I think partly because everything changed so fast.
Yeah, and that's certainly my
Uh,
experience from my
yeah,
business is,
yeah,
you know, being really honest, the tech industry hit a real brick wall a couple of years ago, and it was about
yeah,
keeping the lights on, wasn't it? A little
yeah,
bit.
yeah, yeah,
And now we're
yeah,
back and we're full throttle with a whole new set of tools. And we're
yeah,
just, kind of, I feel like we're having to work really hard to
yeah,
understand what the landscape looks like. And as you and I discussed earlier, as soon as we think we've got a little handle on that, it changes
yeah,
again.
yeah. And also, I think to your point, one of the things that happened, partly driven by COVID, but not totally, I don't think, is that m many managers ended up in leadership positions, and I see boards appointing strong managers into leadership positions because, as you say, we just came through a 5, 6, 7, 8 year period where keeping the lights on was the most important job, right? Keeping things running, and that's what management is. Management is about keeping things running, and so we had strong people in senior positions who could keep things running, who could keep the company going, who could shore it up and make sure that it survived. Whereas the leadership that we need coming out of that period is much more about setting direction, making choices in uncertainty, making the hard calls, bringing people together through change.
Yes.
And many managers aren't necessarily good at that because they're good at the first thing that they
Yeah.
needed to do, and they maybe don't have the skills or the appetite for that. So there's this gap. And I think that's also important. That's, I think, why we've ended up with this group of people defending a position at the top of the business without any real idea, sometimes, about how to how that will succeed.
So, do you think that it's teachable, or do we have to empower those managers to become leaders? What's the journey to resolve this?
Um, I think it's probably a bit of both. I think there are. I work with very good managers who are perfectly capable of leading. When they're not leading, it's either because they're poorly surrounded. That they are not working with a board that understands the difference, perhaps, or has enough experience at that difference. But yeah, I think I work with lots of managers who can be great leaders, some not so much, and it's unfair to take a management skill set that's happy being a management skill set and trying to force it into a leadership position, because that's not going to work well for anybody. And I do see a lot of that. I really do. Post COVID, I'm seeing a lot of that.
Yeah. Thank you. I liked your Smackdown. I think it entered right into the spirit of what the Smithfield Smackdown is. So it was really important that we sort of unpicked that a little bit and resolved it and helped find some solutions for our audience. So thank you for that. Enjoyed that.
You're very welcome.
Um, when you're hiring, what do you look for?
Hmm. Um, yeah, this is a great question, isn't it? And so funnily enough, I'm hiring in two different countries and two different languages right now for two
Which
of
one?
my clients. I'm hiring in France for two clients of mine in France, and also for a company in the UK, a small company in the UK, um, and into two or three different roles. The thing that's hardest to test for, I think, if anyone's got a method for this, I'm all ears, is the ability to think. And I understand that that's a really fuzzy statement, but people who are, irrespective of age, context, background, education, don't care. Um, are you able to engage with an idea, to think your way through it, to challenge it, to think critically about it? So that idea of being able to think, and it's not as simple as creative problem solving or critical thinking. There's a wrapper, there's a broader wrapper. So
Mm,
that's point number one. I made some notes on this. Um, I'm also looking for resilience and proof of resilience,
mm,
because that's resilience and adaptability. I was talking to a very old friend of mine who's got two kids younger than our kids, and we were talking about the difference between education in France and education in the UK. And I said, what would you bestow upon your children if you could? If you could just magic them into something. He said resilience and adaptability,
mm.
and I think both of those things we're looking for, right?
Yeah,
Can you adapt in uncertainty? Are you able to do that and get through to the other side? Are you resilient enough to
mm,
survive that?
yeah,
And then the last two things, curiosity, always. People who aren't interested in everything,
yeah,
I don't get on as well with them, and I want to get on with them if I'm looking to work with them. And then the last one is being comfortable with change. So being comfortable out of your comfort zone.
yeah,
So people who speak more than one language, who've lived in more than one country, who have a life experience that has taught them that being outside your comfort zone is actually exciting,
yeah.
not necessarily terrifying. So that's what I'm looking for.
All very interesting and relatable and very similar to lots of conversations I've had with people in leadership roles. I think they're very familiar. Those words keep coming up: resilience,
Yeah.
adaptability, being able to, kind of deal with change. I like transparency, though. I think, in this
Yeah.
time, that's where the zigzagging has come from because they can't see your thought process and they can't see
Yeah.
why we're pivoting again. So really
Yeah.
kind of taking people on that journey. We are over our 20 minutes recording, Julian, but I
Already.
really don't want to end without hearing a story of you, from you. I really don't want to end without hearing a story from you about your most proud moment in leadership.
Since a company called Where is My Transport. So I was one of the leaders of Where is My Transport for several years. Founded in South Africa. We were ended up in 19, 22 countries, depending on who's counting and when. And we closed the business in July a couple of years ago. Um, my proudest leadership moment didn't come from whilst I was working with the business. It's come since, and it comes frequently. And it's something that um, I I keep very close to me the whole time. So I get calls and emails and notes, and we built a really strong community of people. Um, we are all still in touch with each other. We have alumni groups and so on. And I hear frequently thank yous, compliments, questions about how the leadership team, there were five, six of us at different points. How did we do it? How did we manage to create a culture that was so strong, with such great affection for each other? We cared so much about each other. We cared about the client, but the product, the work, the difference that we were making. And when you're in it, when we were in it, I'm not sure, we were just trying our hardest to do the best job we could. And I'm
Yeah,
not sure we really recognized at the time what we'd put together. And there were at one point 140 of us in that company, and we all put that together as a group. And so I love getting questions and calls from people, and like I say, it happens every few weeks
Mm,
still, saying, "Hey, will you come and talk to my new company because they haven't managed to create what we
mm.
created at Where's My Transport?" And I love that. You did the same at Futureheads, I know you did, because we used to hear the same thing from the team at Futureheads. And it's funny because it's an alchemy that is hard to write down,
Yeah.
and I often have to say no when
Mm.
people say, "Will you come back and talk?" It's like, you can't put it in a jar. There's no recipe. But that's my proudest leadership moment, is that we created something that people
Yeah.
still think is special, and I love that.
And I love that too. That's a really awesome one. And it's a labour of love, isn't it? You just got to
Yeah,
keep showing up
yeah,
and looking
yeah,
around and seeing what people need
yeah,
from you. And it's a
yeah,
cliche because it's true that culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you keep your
yeah.
team happy, you can stay on track.
Yeah, yeah. So no, that's definitely post hoc my proudest leadership moment. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you have been a wonderful guest. You've been my first
Thank you, B.
guest for my podcast. So thanks so much for trusting me. And hopefully the edit will
Always.
turn out brilliantly. And we'll have some good information to share with our audience.